A new report from IBM details how cybercriminals profited from the challenges brought on by the global pandemic. I'm Tanya Hall, and joining me is Nick Rossman, Global Lead for Threat Intelligence at IBM Securities X-Force. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We've had a number of your colleagues from X-Force on the past. Remind us again about the X-Force mission.
Tanya, our IBM Security X-Force team is a global force of experts. We are reverse engineering malware, responding to incidents around the globe, threat intelligence analysts, putting threats into context, as well as our X-Force Red team doing penetration testing to help protect our customers. So we're getting them back online into work after attacks.
X-Force just released a report detailing how cyber attacks evolved in 2020 as threat actors sought to profit from the challenges brought on by the global pandemic. Give us a summary of the report's findings, if you will.
Tanya, there's a couple of key points, and I'll go right into the global pandemic. We saw in 2020 that attackers were trying to use the pandemic for incidents. So whether that was for spam emails, for basic scams, or, our team covered targeting of PPE. So trying to get after the PPE supply chain. And then later on, attacks and phishing emails against the COVID-19 supply chain. We just see this continuous effort again of attackers going after themes related to COVID-19. And it's important because history often rhymes, and we're probably going to see some of the same sorts of phishing attempts, the same sorts of scams that we saw as we go into 2021 with so many issues with the vaccine and COVID still ongoing. I think a couple other areas for the report is, ransomware. About 23% of the attacks that we saw this year had involved ransomware. And often those were including double extortion techniques. So that's when attacker goes in, they encrypt the environment, but they also leave a note that says, hey, we stole a couple gigs of your data. So it adds a ransomware event alongside data theft. We saw a growth in threats to hybrid cloud environments generally. Now, not to say that we're seeing attacks on the infrastructure as a service, everything running on the cloud, but we saw, along with our partner in Tezer, a growth in the number of malware targeting Linux platforms. So Linux runs about 90% of cloud environments. And in that particular case, the growth was in crypto miners. So as what else happened in 2020 besides a global pandemic? Well, the price of Bitcoin just skyrocketed as well. So the value of using crypto miners for the bad guys was also extremely useful. And one of the other key points was we saw a growth in change in the number of spoofed brands that we track. We typically see a lot dealing with the big tech companies or social media firms, but this year we saw our first consumer brand, Adidas, be among the top 10 groups. And this was on the heels of the release of Kanye West's shoes early in the year.
Microsoft Teams is helping a bicycle company reinvent the way that they work.
We make bicycles for everyday riders. Once the pandemic hit, we started doing virtual visits. All of a sudden, we could open up our showroom to customers around the world.
Learn more at Microsoft.com/Teams.
Explain how brand spoofing works.
Yeah, so brand spoofing often, what they'll do is they'll take a name of a domain, and then they'll swap out similar characters or add in some others. So if there is an O, they might put in a 0. And that could easily fool someone if you're not looking directly at the address, right? We often just click if we're getting a phishing, an email. Unfortunately, some people go in and say, "Oh, this looks like my Facebook account," and it might only have, may have 2 Ks at the end of it, and we don't notice. So that's the type of thing that we're tracking. In the case of Adidas, what we saw were, the websites that were stood up looking like Adidas.com were trying to sell counterfeit sneakers, counterfeit clothing, and also could have been used to, send malware, distribute, try to gain credentials as well.
What are we missing that continues to make ransomware such a reoccurring threat?
It's been so devastating. And I think also, I got from the report this year is that ransomware hits every industry and every geography. That, we see schools and healthcare organizations constantly hit. I think what's been added to the game for the attackers is that they are staying ahead in this kind of cat and mouse game with us and the defense side. So as we helped companies and the rest of the security community did prepare for incidents, say, hey, get your backups.
AMD launches Ryzen Pro 4000, and Adrian Kingsley Hughes here to talk with me about this. Adrian, this is really a niche area here for this company.
Yeah, it's interesting to see AMD from where it was about a decade ago, where it was really up against the ropes as far as Intel was concerned. Everything it seemed to be releasing was just very poor iterations on the previous one. Then it left its server market to rot on the vine for a long time. And then slowly over the past few years, AMD has almost risen from its own ashes, from years of losing money to now coming out with chips where it's really pushing against Intel very hard. We've seen that in the server market, which was a market that was absolutely locked up by Intel. Now we've got AMD there with its EPYC platform doing really well. everything from the cheap Ryzen 3 end up to the Ryzen 9 end, which is the high-end expensive range. Then there's the Threadripper for people who want to throw more than $1,000 on a chip. But now we're also seeing AMD update a line that I really didn't think was going to get updated, and this is the Pro line. This is a line for enterprise laptops and thin devices, where AMD is giving enterprise buyers exactly what they want, I think, in many ways. A guarantee that the hardware will be supported for 18 months, a very different QA certification for their hardware, a guarantee amount of time for how long this hardware will be available, because people don't want to be throwing stuff away and having to upgrade everything when chips become obsolete. And also this really cool focus on security, on making a chip the heart of a system that can make a very secure system. And I think the really interesting part about seeing AMD with the Ryzen Pro now is that it's now updated the line, and it's put in more cores. There's significant performance here, and it's again beating Intel. And that's just a really big move forward for AMD. And I think it's a real testament to their technology department that they're managing to do this.
Yeah, pretty impressive to see how that's come around for the company there, Adrian. And I think it's interesting, like you said, it was at least 10, 12 years ago when you were writing about AMD and had a very different feeling as to where things were going for them.
Well, the company was seen as, it was one of those David and Goliath stories where everybody was rooting for the little guy. And I think it developed too much of a fan base and sort of bought into the kind of idea that this was where it should be. And that led the company into tar pits. But recently, we've actually seen it really shake up the market. Whereas Intel's a massive company with a slow development cycle and a slow product release cycle, and it's very locked in how it wants to do business. AMD comes in and almost just disrupts that market. And I think the Pro market is a place where AMD is really focused on. And it's really interesting because it's not as lucrative as the mainstream market might have once seemed, but now we've got it going into server markets, and it's made a massive hit in the server market. I think the Pro market is now definitely ready for some new chips, some really increased performance, and some extra security features that they can get from this platform.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, well, really interesting. I know you've got the full article up here on Adrian for this on ZDNet, and much more, of course, on AMD and the Ryzen Pro 4000. So you guys can all check that out on ZDNet. We hope you will, and we appreciate you watching today.